Hi, this is Ryan, and I think I've been looking at this entirely backwards for the last 3 years. I sit here reviewing $400 Cal Digit docks and these massive ultra-wide OLEDs, talking about how they're going to revolutionize your workflow. But last week, I was at a friend's place watching him try to edit on a $3,000 MacBook Pro. Every time he hit the spacebar, his screen visibly wobbled. He'd bought one of those $45 generic gas spring monitor arms on Amazon, the ones with the cheap snap-on plastic wire covers, and it was slowly losing pneumatic pressure. By 2 p.m., his screen had sagged almost 2 inches, and he was physically hunching his shoulders forward just to read his timeline. It kind of hit me. We spend thousands of dollars on the silicon sitting on our desks, but we completely ignore the physics of the desk itself. There is this invisible friction killing your productivity every single day, and it has absolutely nothing to do with your processor speed or your RAM. I've isolated 7 specific structural upgrades that most of us are completely ignoring. If you want to stop burning money on tech that doesn't actually fix your daily workflow, maybe hit subscribe so we can start fixing the foundation together. Because honestly, how much of your daily work fatigue is actually just a geometry problem? Okay, look at your desk right now. Seriously, just take a second and look down. If you're anything like I was a year ago, you probably have a nest of black cables cascading off the back edge, like some kind of sad electronic waterfall. You've got a power brick sitting on the carpet, soaking up dust, and your monitor is probably sitting on the stand it came with in the box, which, fine, it works. But this is the stuff nobody talks about when they review a $1,200 monitor. They talk about color accuracy and local dimming zones. They don't mention the massive V-shaped plastic base takes up 40% of your usable desk depth. So, naturally, you go on Amazon to reclaim that space. You search monitor arm. This is where the first massive trap happens. I almost fell for it myself. You see a dual monitor gas spring arm for $49. It looks sleek. The product photos show it floating effortlessly in midair. But what they don't show you is what happens at month 14. I ordered one of those budget arms last year for a secondary setup I was testing. Out of the box, it felt decent. A little stiff, maybe. But I bolted it to my desk, a solid core wood top, thankfully, because if you clamp one of these onto an IKEA honeycomb paper desk, it will literally punch a hole straight through the veneer under the leverage of the screen. Anyway, I mounted a 27-inch IPS panel to it. For a few months, it was great. Then the sag started. Gas pneumatic cylinders rely on a pressurized seal. Cheap ones use cheap seals. Every time I adjusted the height, I was slowly wearing down that O-ring. Eventually, I'd set the monitor at eye level, start typing, and watch it slowly, agonizingly creep downward over the next hour. I was constantly hooking my fingers under the bezel to nudge it back up. It drove me insane. You don't realize how much a screen sitting 2 inches below your natural eye line destroys your posture until you spend 8 hours a day unconsciously jutting your chin forward to compensate. The upgrade everyone ignores here isn't just buy a monitor arm. It's buying a mechanical coil spring arm. They're heavier, they're bulkier. An Ergotron LX arm feels like you're holding a piece of industrial manufacturing equipment. It doesn't have that slim, futuristic look of the cheap gas arms, but a mechanical coil doesn't leak. I have an Ergotron that's been holding up a heavy 34-inch ultrawide for 4 years, and if I push it back with one finger, it stays exactly where I leave it. The rotational joint behind the Visa plate has maybe a millimeter of give. There's no slop. It's a structural investment, not a disposable accessory. Okay, let me back up for a second. I keep saying structural, but what I really mean is friction. We are trying to eliminate the microscopic points of friction that drain your focus. Which brings me to this second upgrade, and it's the one sitting right next to your monitor, your dock. If you're a laptop to desktop switcher, you know the drill. You come home, plug in a single USB-C cable, and suddenly your laptop is driving 2 4K screens, routing gigabit Ethernet, reading an SSD, and charging at the same time. It feels like magic. Until the magic gets too hot. I tested a highly rated $80 hub a few months back, advertised as 100-watt power delivery. Sounds great. But the spec sheet selectively forgets to mention thermal throttling. I plugged in my MacBook at 15% battery, fired up a heavy 4K render in Premiere, and touched the aluminum chassis of the hub. It was physically hot enough to make me pull my hand back. Because it lacked proper thermal pads on the inside, the hub's internal controller started panicking. So to save itself from melting, it aggressively dropped the power delivery. So here I am plugged into the wall, watching my laptop battery drain while it's supposedly charging. Then the external monitor started doing that random intermittent black screen flicker. You've probably seen that. Everyone blames the HDMI cable. It's almost never the cable. It's the dock overheating and dropping data packets. This is the hidden truth about docking stations. You aren't paying $300 for a CalDigit TS4 just for more ports. You're paying for a massive aluminum heatsink that can sustain 98 watts of power delivery while pushing 40 gigabits of data without having a thermal meltdown. And this is where it starts to get a little weird, because once you fix the monitor geometry and you stabilize the data flow, you start noticing the other things on your desk, the things that are actively fighting against you. Let's talk about the monitor light bar trend, because this is where the marketing genuinely feels like a scam. Every minimal desk setup on YouTube features one of these sleek aluminum tubes sitting on top of the monitor. The promise is that it illuminates your desk without causing screen glare. So you go out and buy a $35 light bar from a random alphabet soup brand. I did exactly this. I clipped it to my LG ultrawide, turned off the overhead lights, and topped the captive power button. Immediately, my screen looked like it was covered in Vaseline. If you leaned in close, you could physically count the reflection of 40 individual LED diodes bouncing off the top 2 inches of the glossy panel. It was blinding. The problem is cheap light bars use symmetrical optical tubes. They just blast light in a 180-degree cone. A quarter of that light hits your desk, a quarter hits your keyboard, and half of it fires directly into the anti-glare coating of your monitor, completely washing out your contrast. The upgrade you actually need is a bar with an asymmetrical optical cutoff. I bought the BenQ Screen Bar Halo to test this, and it's genuinely strange the first time you turn it on. You look at the desk surface, perfectly illuminated. You look at the screen, pitch black. It uses this precision internal reflector to throw the light forward at a sharp 45-degree angle, cutting off precisely 1 millimeter before it would hit the glass. It's an incredible piece of engineering. I assumed the BenQ was the flawless endgame lighting solution, and I was half wrong. The wireless control puck they include with it drains batteries so aggressively that I'm replacing AAAs every 6 weeks. Plus, it goes to sleep to save power, so you have to tap it once to wake it up, wait a second, and then spin the dial to change the brightness. It is a tiny, stupid UI friction that drives me absolutely crazy on a $170 light. But I still use it because the optics are just that much better than the cheap stuff. But lighting is just visual. The next trap is structural, and it involves the single heaviest thing on your desk, the cables. I used to think cable management was just an aesthetic choice, a vanity project. I was convinced those lightweight wire mesh trays were the smartest option. You screw them under the desk, drop your cables in, and you're done. Then I loaded one up. I threw in a heavy 10-outlet surge protector, the massive power brick for the CalDigit dock, 2 laptop chargers, and the power supply for the monitor. 3 days later, I heard this sickening creak. The wire mesh was bowing so severely in the middle that the outward tension was literally trying to shear the mounting screws out of the wood. If you use those cheap plastic J-channel raceways with the double-sided tape, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You stuff 3 thick power cables into them, and at 2 a.m. you wake up to a massive crash because the adhesive finally gave up and dropped 10 pounds of electronics onto your floor. You cannot use plastic or mesh for high-density setups. You need a 16-gauge folded steel tray that is physically bolted into the desk. It's the only thing that won't deflect under the load of modern power bricks. And speaking of power and data, this is where we need to talk about the absolute dirtiest secret in the desk upgrade world, the DisplayLink trap. If you have a base M1, M2, or M3 MacBook, you know Apple arbitrarily limits you to 1 external display. To get around this, people buy these specific dual monitor docking stations. The Amazon reviews are glowing. Finally, I can use 2 4K screens. Actually, wait, that's not the right way to put it. They're not lying. They just don't realize what they've actually bought. These docks bypass Apple's hardware limit by using a software protocol called DisplayLink. It's not a native video connection. Your laptop's CPU is essentially screen recording a second desktop, compressing that video, shoving it down a USB cable, and a chip inside the dock is uncompressing it and sending it to your monitor. It works fine if you're staring at a static Excel spreadsheet, but the second you try to edit video, play a game, or even just drag a heavy Lightroom window across your screen, the illusion shatters. The cursor trails half a second behind your mouse movement. You get these weird compression artifacts around text. Your CPU spikes just from moving windows around. It is a miserable, laggy experience that people endure simply because they don't know they bought a software workaround instead of a hardware solution. You think you're upgrading your setup, but you're actively degrading your machine's performance to power a second screen. So, how do you actually build a setup that doesn't constantly fight you? How do you know which of these upgrades are actually worth the money? All right, so what do we actually do with all this? Because the reality is, if you try to fix everything at once, you're going to spend $2,000 and a whole weekend under your desk fighting with zip ties, and you'll still probably hate something about it. You have to prioritize the upgrades that eliminate the most friction. Here is exactly how I would handle this if it were my money building a setup from scratch today. First, stop buying cheap gas spring monitor arms. I cannot stress this enough. If you have a standard 27-inch monitor and you just need to lift it off the desk to reclaim space, and you aren't constantly adjusting the height, don't buy an arm at all. Buy a static VESA-compatible pole mount. The Vivo single arm is like $35. It's essentially a metal pipe with an adjustable bracket. You set the height with an Allen key, tighten it down, and it will survive a nuclear blast. There are no gas cylinders to fail. But if you do need dynamic movement, if you stand up, sit down, or pull the screen close to edit, you have to pay the toll. Buy an Ergotron LX. Look for a refurbished or Amazon renewed model if you want to save some cash. Their mechanical springs genuinely last a decade, so buying used is incredibly safe. It completely solves the geometry problem. Second, the docking station situation. If you are a single cable laptop to desktop user, you have to be honest about your workload. If you are just doing web browsing and email, a solid $150 Anchor hub is fine. Just keep an eye on the thermals. But if you are running two 4K monitors, high-speed external storage, and demanding 100-watt power delivery, do not cheap out here. Avoid anything that says DisplayLink unless you are absolutely trapped by a base model MacBook and desperately need that second screen. You want a native Thunderbolt 4 or USB 4 dock. The CalDigit TS4 is painfully expensive. I know. I swallowed hard when I bought mine, but the moment I plugged it in, every phantom issue I had, screens not waking from sleep, external drives randomly ejecting, random UI lag, just vanished. It is the invisible backbone of the desk. Third, the lighting. Unless you frequently work in the dark, skip the monitor light bar entirely. It's an aesthetic flex more than a necessity for daytime work. But if you do work at night and eye strain is a real problem, you must get an asymmetrical bar. The BenQ is great optically, but the Xiaomi Mi computer monitor light bar is usually around half the price and achieves a very similar optical cutoff with a slightly less annoying wireless puck. Finally, the cables. Stop using plastic raceways and thin mesh. Go to Amazon, find a heavy-duty 16-gauge steel cable tray that screws directly into the underside of your desk. Mount a solid metal power strip inside that rigid spine. You will do it once, it will take an hour, and you will never look down and feel that spike of anxiety about the rat's nest by your feet ever again. I guess what I'm realizing is that the best desk upgrades aren't the ones you interact with. They're the ones that disappear. A good monitor arm means you stop thinking about neck pain. A good dock means you stop thinking about cables. A solid cable tray means you stop kicking your power strip. You don't need RGB lighting or a desk pad with wireless charging built in. You just need a foundation that stops fighting you. Anyway, that's where I'm at with this. I'm going to go try to convince my friend to throw that $45 gas arm in the trash before it ruins his posture permanently. Let me know down below which piece of your setup is currently driving you insane, and maybe we can figure out the fix. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.